My name's Walter. I'm 84, and I want to tell you exactly what it feels like to sit in a doctor's office and hear a number attached to the rest of your life. 6 months, he said. Maybe 8. I didn't cry. I nodded. Then I drove home and sat in my driveway in Sarasota for 40 minutes, just looking at my own front door. Now, I'm not going to tell you a beach in Thailand cured me. I'm not in the magic business. But that doctor said 6 months. That was 19 months ago. 3 weeks back, I went snorkeling off an island most Americans have never heard of, and a fish the color of a struck match swam right through my legs, and I laughed so hard I swallowed seawater. A man told he had 6 months doesn't usually spend month 19 laughing underwater at a fish, so something happened in between. Let me tell you what it was. I spent 44 years as a marine mechanic down in Sarasota. Boat engines, mostly. Big diesel inboards, little outboards, the whole range. My father did the same work before me down in Fort Myers, and I suppose I never questioned that I'd end up with grease under my fingernails the same way he did. I married a woman named Doris in 1968. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Doris passed in 2019 with her heart in her sleep, which the doctor told me was about as merciful as these things get, though I didn't feel merciful about it for a long time. After Doris went, I kept the house. I kept the routine. I still got up at 5:30 because that's when I'd always gotten up, and I still made the same coffee in the same percolator, and I still drove past the marina most mornings even though I'd retired years before, just to watch the boats come in. My daughter Carol lives 40 minutes away in Bradenton. My son Michael is out in Arizona. They called. They were good children, still are. But you understand there's a particular kind of quiet that settles into a house after 51 years of somebody else's noise leaves it, and no phone call quite fills that quiet, no matter how much love is behind it. I want you to understand that before I ever heard a doctor say 6 months, I was already a man living carefully at the edges of his own life. Not unhappy exactly, just smaller than I used to be. I think a lot of people my age know exactly what that feels like, that particular shrinking that happens after the person who filled up the house is gone. Then in the fall of last year, I started losing weight I hadn't tried to lose, and I got tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. And Carol made me go to the doctor, which I'd been putting off the way men my generation put off doctors. Like admitting you need one is admitting you've already lost something. The test took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of not knowing is its own particular kind of hell, and I won't dwell on it because I suspect some of you watching have lived through exactly that stretch yourselves and don't need me to describe it back to you. And then came the appointment. Pancreatic cancer, already advanced by the time it showed itself, which is unfortunately how that particular disease tends to introduce itself to a person. The oncologist was a decent, careful man, and he laid out the options. Aggressive treatment that might buy some additional months at a real cost to how I'd feel during them, or a gentler path that focused on comfort rather than extension. He gave me the number because I asked him for it directly, man to man, and he respected me enough to answer honestly instead of dancing around it. 6 months, perhaps 8. Here's the belief I carried out of that office, and I suspect it's a belief a lot of people carry when they get a number like that. I thought the 6 months were something to be endured. I thought my job now was to get my affairs in order, sign the paperwork, make my peace, and wait quietly in the house for the thing to happen. I thought that was simply what dying looked like. You go still. You wait. You let the world get smaller and smaller around you until it's just a bed and a window and a nurse checking on you twice a day. I want to pause here because there's something underneath that belief that I didn't examine for a long time, and maybe you haven't examined it either if you've ever been in a similar spot, watching someone you love go through it, or facing it yourself. I thought that spending my last months doing anything joyful, anything big, anything that looked like actual living would somehow be undignified, like a man in my position ought to be solemn about it, like joy and dying didn't belong in the same sentence. What I didn't understand yet, and what took me the better part of 2 months to figure out, was that the 6 months weren't a waiting room. They were the last chapter of an actual book, and I was the only one who got to decide what got written in it. That realization didn't come to me in a lightning bolt. It came slowly, over a lot of long nights, and it came partly because of my son. Michael called me about 3 weeks after the diagnosis. He'd been stationed in Thailand for a stretch back in the early 90s, Air Force, out of a base near Thani, and he'd always talked about it the way men talk about a place that changed something in them young. He said, "Dad, I know this is going to sound strange, but I don't think you should spend whatever time you've got left in that house." And I got a little sharp with him, if I'm honest, because grief and fear make a man sharp sometimes, and I said something like, "Where exactly do you suggest I go, Michael? Disney World?" And he was quiet for a second, and then he said, "No, Dad, I think you should go somewhere warm and slow and kind. I think you should go to Thailand." I laughed at him. I want to be honest about that too. I laughed, not unkindly, but the way you laugh at an idea so far outside anything you'd considered that your mind doesn't know what else to do with it. An 83-year-old man, freshly diagnosed with a terminal illness, flying 17 hours to a country he'd never set foot in, where he didn't speak the language, where he knew not one single soul. It sounded, frankly, insane. But here's the thing about a number like 6 months. It does something strange to your relationship with risk. For 83 years, risk had been something to manage, something to insure against, something you weighed carefully before you acted. And suddenly the biggest risk of all, the one everyone spends their whole life trying to avoid, was already sitting in the room with me regardless of what I did. And once that risk is already there, once it's already made itself at home, the smaller risks start to look almost laughably small by comparison. What exactly was Thailand going to do to me that hadn't already been done? That's the hidden truth I want you to sit with for a moment, because I think it applies to a lot more situations than just mine. Most of us spend our whole lives protecting a future that isn't guaranteed to anyone, sick or healthy. We tell ourselves we'll travel later, we'll do the big thing later, we'll finally live once the conditions are right. And the conditions are never quite right, are they? There's always one more reason to wait. I had spent 2 years waiting in that house in Sarasota for conditions that were never going to arrive, and it took a doctor telling me my time was short to show me that the waiting itself had been the real thief. So I called Michael back 3 days later and told him I wanted to go. Now, I need to slow down here because I promised you honesty, and honesty means I have to tell you about the part that almost stopped me before I even got on the plane, which was my own body and my own fear working against each other. The first honest conversation I had wasn't with Michael, it was with my oncologist. I sat down across from him and told him what I was thinking, and I watched his face carefully because I half expected him to tell me I was being foolish, that a man in my condition shouldn't be flying across the world, that I should stay close to my medical team. He surprised me. He said something I've thought about many times since. He said, "Walter, at this stage, my job isn't to add months to your life at any cost. My job is to help you have the best version of whatever time is left, and only you get to decide what that looks like." He told me plainly what the risks were. He told me I'd need to establish a relationship with a hospital wherever I ended up, that I'd need copies of my full medical records translated, that certain complications could come on fast and I'd want to know exactly where the nearest capable facility was before I needed it, not after. That conversation mattered enormously, and I want to say clearly to anyone watching this who's in a similar spot, do not skip that conversation. Do not go around your own doctor. Go through them, with them, and let them help you plan it properly instead of running off on hope alone. The second hard conversation was with Carol, and that one was harder than the first because Carol's fear wasn't clinical. It was a daughter's fear, plain and simple. She sat in my kitchen and she said, "Dad, If something happens to you over there, I won't be able to get to you in a day. I won't be able to hold your hand. And I didn't have a clever answer for that, because she was right and I told her she was right. What I told her was that I understood the fear and that I loved her for it, but that I had spent 2 years in that kitchen already being safe and being reachable and being close, and it hadn't given me anything except quiet. I told her I didn't want my last chapter to be the safest one. I wanted it to be the truest one. She cried. I cried too, for the first time since the driveway. And then, a few weeks later, she did something I didn't expect. She helped me plan the trip, not because her fear disappeared, but because she decided, in the end, that helping me live the way I wanted mattered more than her own comfort. That's a kind of love I don't think I fully understood until she showed it to me. I want to give you a simple picture here, an analogy, because I think it captures what that decision felt like better than a straight explanation could. Staying in that house in Sarasota, waiting out my 6 months, would have been like reading the last chapter of a good book with my thumb over half the words, just to make it last longer. Going to Thailand felt like finally letting myself read every word of that last chapter, even knowing exactly how many pages were left. So here's what I actually did practically, because I know some of you watching aren't here for the poetry. You're here for the how. I want to be straight about the numbers as of right now because things change and I don't want to hand you old information. Thailand's standard retirement route for anyone over 50 is the non-immigrant OA visa. As it stands today, you need either roughly 800,000 baht sitting in a Thai bank account, which comes to somewhere around 21 to 23,000 US dollars depending on the exchange rate that week, or you need to show a monthly income of about 65,000 baht, which is somewhere near $1,800 to $1,900. On top of that, Thailand now requires mandatory health insurance through an approved provider, with a minimum of 400,000 baht in inpatient coverage and 40,000 baht outpatient. You'll also need a police clearance and a basic medical certificate, and once you're in, you report your address to immigration every 90 days, and you renew the whole thing annually. I am telling you this not as gospel because immigration rules shift, and you should always check directly with the Thai embassy or a licensed immigration consultant before you make any decision based on numbers you heard in a video, mine included. But that's the shape of it as things stand. Given my situation, my doctor and I decided against the OA route entirely, at least for now. Given the nature of my prognosis, I came in on an extended tourist arrangement instead, with every intention of being honest with immigration about exactly why I was there, and I'd encourage anyone in a serious medical situation to talk to an immigration lawyer about the right category for their own circumstances, rather than assuming mine applies to them. Everyone's situation is different, and this is exactly the kind of thing you don't want to guess your way through. Michael flew with me. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters. I did not do this entirely alone, and I don't think anyone in a fragile position should try to. He'd taken a leave from his job, and we flew from Tampa to Los Angeles, and then the long haul, 16 hours, to Bangkok. I won't pretend that flight was easy on an 83-year-old body already fighting something serious inside it. It wasn't. My legs swelled, I needed the aisle seat, and I needed to stand more than the man behind me appreciated. But I made it, and when we came down through the clouds into Bangkok at 2 in the morning, and I saw that enormous sprawling carpet of light stretching out in every direction, something in my chest did a thing it hadn't done in 2 years. It lifted, just slightly. Just enough that I noticed it happening. We spent 4 days in Bangkok first, mostly resting, mostly letting my body catch up to the time change, which at my age and in my condition takes considerably longer than it used to. Bangkok is enormous and loud and full of a kind of energy I hadn't expected. Motorbikes weaving through impossible gaps in traffic,
street vendors calling out over sizzling woks, gold temple spires catching the late afternoon sun between glass office towers. It was a lot, honestly, for a tired old man fresh off a long flight, and I want to be honest that Bangkok itself wasn't where I wanted to stay. Michael had suggested Chiang Mai up in the north, cooler, slower, mountain air instead of the coastal humidity, and after 4 days recovering, we took a short domestic flight up. And Chiang Mai, I have to tell you, did something to me almost immediately. We landed in the late morning, and the air had a different quality to it than Bangkok, lighter somehow, and cooler, with hills visible in the distance instead of endless concrete. Michael had arranged for us to stay near the old city, inside the moat, in a small serviced apartment on the ground floor, no stairs, which mattered enormously given my condition. And that first evening, too tired to do much else, I asked Michael to just wheel my chair, because by then I needed one more often than not, out to the edge of the old city wall, and we sat there as the sun went down behind the mountains, and the temple bells started up somewhere nearby, soft and unhurried, and I sat in that chair and I wept, not from sadness. I want to be clear about that, from something closer to relief, the particular relief of a man who has been holding his breath for 2 years and finally remembers how to let it out. Let me tell you about the mornings, because the mornings became the center of everything. There's a woman named Nok who runs a small coffee stall 3 streets from where we stayed, an older widow herself, maybe 60, with a laugh that carries half a block. The first morning we went, Michael ordered for both of us since my Thai was non-existent, and Nok looked at me a long moment, this obviously unwell old foreigner in a wheelchair, and instead of the polite distance I half expected, she came around the counter, took my hand in both of hers, and said something to Michael that he translated as, "This one, we take good care of him." And from that morning forward, every single day we went, she had my coffee ready before I'd even settled into the chair, strong and sweetened with condensed milk, and she'd ask after me through Michael at first, and later in the small handful of Thai words I managed to learn myself, "Sabai di mai," "Are you well?" And I found myself, most mornings, able to answer honestly that yes, I was. I want to give you an analogy here because I think it explains something important. Being sick in Sarasota felt like being a stone dropped into a very large, very quiet pond. The ripples went out and eventually just disappeared into nothing, and nobody much noticed the stone at the bottom. Being sick in Chiang Mai felt like being a stone dropped into a small warm bathtub with other people already in it. Everyone felt the splash. Everyone shifted to make room. I was, for the first time in 2 years, impossible to overlook. The healthcare piece deserves its own honest telling, because I promised you I wouldn't paint a fairy tale. And healthcare when you're seriously ill is not a place for fairy tales. Within my first week in Chiang Mai, we established a relationship with Chiang Mai Ram Hospital, a private hospital well known for treating international patients. My oncologist back in Florida had prepared a full set of translated records ahead of time, which turned out to be one of the smartest things we did, because the physician there, Dr. Sumchai, was able to review my full history in detail on our very first visit, rather than starting from scratch. I want to be plain that the level of care surprised me. The facility was clean, modern. The equipment looked current, and Dr. Sumchai spoke excellent English and, more than that, spoke to me the way my own doctor back home did, straight, honest, no sugarcoating, but also no coldness. He didn't promise me anything he couldn't deliver. He told me clearly what palliative options were available to help manage pain and symptoms, and he was honest that his role, like my American doctors, was about quality rather than a cure. I want to underline that for anyone watching who might be tempted to hear this story and think a plane ticket fixes what medicine can't, it does not. What changed for me wasn't my diagnosis. What changed was everything around it. The cost, since I know some of you are doing that math in your head the way I once would have. A full consultation with imaging review ran me the equivalent of about $90. My pain management medications, which back home were running into hundreds of dollars a month even with Medicare's help, cost me roughly a third of that here. I carry a private international medical insurance policy specifically because Medicare, as most of you probably already know, does not follow you outside the United States, and I want to say directly to anyone considering something like this, do not come here, especially in a medical situation like mine, without proper international coverage. That is not a place to try to save money. My policy runs me a little over $400 a month, given my age and condition, and it has been worth every single cent of it. Let me talk plainly about money for a moment, because I know some of you are running the numbers in your head right now the same way I once would have, and I don't think it's polite to dance around it. Our apartment near the old city wall, a one-bedroom, ground-floor, wheelchair-accessible, fully furnished, runs Michael and me the equivalent of about $600 a month, which in Sarasota would barely have covered a room half its size. Groceries and the occasional meal out come to somewhere around $400 a month between the two of us, and that includes far more restaurant food than I ever allowed myself back home, because eating out here isn't the occasional treat it was in Florida. It's simply how a Tuesday goes. A private driver, which I need now more than I used to, costs us maybe $200 a month for regular trips to appointments and the market. Add in my insurance, my medications, and a reasonable cushion for anything unexpected, and we're living comfortably, medical care included, on something under $2,000 a month for the both of us. I want to be honest that this is not a place to go looking to get rich or even to save enormously, especially given my medical costs. It is simply a place where a fixed income or a modest retirement account stretches into an actual life instead of a careful, worried survival. I also want to be honest about the parts of this that aren't gentle, because a man my age selling you a fantasy would be doing you a real disservice. There are people here, as there are anywhere in the world, who see an elderly foreigner in a wheelchair and see an opportunity rather than a person. Early on, before we understood the going rates for things, a tuk-tuk driver quoted us nearly triple what a local would pay for the same short ride, and a market vendor tried the same thing with a bag of longan fruit. Roger was the one who sat me down and explained gently that this isn't malice exactly, it's simply what happens in any tourist economy when you don't yet know the actual price of things. The fix isn't suspicion of everyone you meet. It's patience and asking a trusted local friend and slowly learning the real numbers the way you'd learn them in any new town. Once Knox started introducing us around as her regulars, that foreigner markup mostly disappeared on its own because we'd become known rather than passing through. Now let me tell you about the ordinary days, because I think the ordinary days are actually the whole point of this story more than any of the big dramatic moments. I wake most mornings around 6 without an alarm because the light here comes in soft and early and my body has learned to follow it. Michael helps me into the chair, and we go to Knox's stall for coffee, and I sit there most mornings for the better part of an hour, watching the street wake up. Monks in saffron robes walking past, collecting morning alms from kneeling shopkeepers, the smell of something frying 2 doors down, a stray dog that has adopted our route and now waits for us most mornings like an old friend. Around mid-morning, if I have the energy, we walk slowly through the old city, past the temples, and I have become genuinely fond of a place called Wat Chetty Luang, an enormous half-ruined ancient temple structure that somehow feels more alive in its incompleteness than a perfectly finished building ever could. There's something about sitting near that old broken structure, still standing after 600 years despite everything that's happened to it, that speaks to a man in my particular position more than words ever could. In the afternoons, when the heat is heaviest, I rest. My body needs more rest now than it used to, and I've made peace with that rather than fighting it the way I might have a year ago. In the evenings, there's almost always something happening nearby, a small market, a gathering, and Michael has made a habit of wheeling me out most nights just to be among people. Because I told him early on that whatever time I have left, I did not want to spend it staring at four walls. I've made a friend here I want to tell you about, a British fellow named Roger, 71 years old, who's lived in Chiang Mai for 11 years and lost his own wife to cancer 4 years back. We met at a small expat gathering at a coffee shop near the university, one of those informal Thursday meetups where retirees from a dozen countries sit around comparing notes on doctors and visas and the best place to get a decent breakfast. Roger sat down next to my chair, and within about 10 minutes of conversation, he said something that has stuck with me since. He said, "Walter, the strange gift of knowing your time is short is that you stop wasting the time you've got left being anything other than exactly who you are." Most people spend their whole healthy lives performing for somebody. You don't have that luxury anymore. And honestly, mate, it's the closest thing to freedom I've ever seen a man walk into. There's one evening in particular I keep coming back to, and it happened to fall during Loy Krathong, the festival where the whole country sets small floating lanterns adrift on the rivers and canals to let go of the year's troubles. Roger wheeled me down to the moat that surrounds the old city, and by the time we arrived, the water was already scattered with hundreds of small floating baskets, each one holding a candle and a flower, drifting slow circles in the dark. Nock had made me one herself, without my asking, a little raft of banana leaf folded into a lotus shape with a single white candle at its center, and she pressed it into my hands and told me, through Michael, that I was meant to let it go while thinking of whatever I most needed to release of. I sat there in that chair at the edge of the water for a long moment, the candlelight from hundreds of little rafts scattered across the surface like something out of a dream I hadn't earned. And I thought of Doris, and I thought of that driveway in Sarasota, and I let it go and watched it drift out with all the others until I couldn't tell mine apart from anyone else's anymore. Michael tells me I was smiling the whole time. I believe him. I've thought about that sentence almost every day since he said it. I want to tell you about a particular afternoon because I think it captures something important about what's actually happened to me here. About 4 months in, I had a hard stretch, a complication that landed me in the hospital for 6 days, real pain, real fear, the kind where you genuinely wonder if this is the week the number finally comes due. Michael slept in a chair beside my bed every one of those nights, and on the 4th day a nurse named Ploy, maybe 30 years old, came in during a particularly rough evening, and instead of simply administering medication and moving on to the next room, she sat down, took my hand, and just stayed there for perhaps 20 minutes while the worst of it passed, saying almost nothing, just present. When it eased, she smiled and said the only English phrase she used the whole time. "Not alone," she said. "You are not alone." And I have carried those 3 words since like a smooth stone in my pocket. That's the honest truth of the hardest part of this, and I want to give it to you straight rather than skip past it the way some of these stories do. There have been hard days. There will be more of them. The disease has not stopped its course, and I am not going to sit here and tell you I've beaten it, because I haven't. And anyone who tells you a location on a map can beat a disease like mine is either mistaken or selling you something. What I can tell you is that the quality inside those hard days changed enormously, because I am no longer facing them alone in a quiet house watching my own front door. I am facing them surrounded by people who, despite having known me only a matter of months, have decided I matter to them. Let me tell you about the long-term piece of this, because even a short remaining road benefits from a little structure. And I think that's true whether you've got 6 months or 60 years left. I built a simple routine here, and I'd encourage anyone facing something serious, whatever the timeline, to do the same. Mornings with knock, because a person needs a place where they're expected. A regular relationship with a single trusted doctor, because continuity of care matters more than almost anything else when you're managing something serious. A small handful of real friendships, Roger chief among them, because loneliness is its own separate illness and I refuse to let it run alongside the one I already have. And time set aside most days for something that has nothing to do with being sick at all. A walk, a temple, a conversation with a stranger, a fish swimming through my legs off a boat near Koh Tao, which is a story I promised you and haven't gotten to yet. That trip happened about 7 weeks ago. Michael had heard from another expat that there was a way to arrange a very gentle, very shallow snorkeling excursion suited to someone in a wheelchair, a small operation that specializes in accessible ocean trips for people with disabilities and serious illness. I almost said no. My first instinct, even after everything I'd already done, was that a man in my condition had no business getting into open water. But I thought about Roger's sentence, about not wasting the time performing caution for its own sake, and I said yes. They lowered me from the boat with a special harness, gently, into water so clear it barely seemed to exist between me and the reef below. And a school of small fish, brilliant orange, the exact color of a struck match, came up out of the coral and swam directly around and through the space between my legs, completely unbothered by the enormous, slow old creature floating above them. I laughed so hard, genuinely, from somewhere deep in my chest that I hadn't used in years, that I took in a mouthful of seawater and had to be helped back into the boat, coughing and laughing at the same time, and Michael was laughing too, and crying a little, and I understood in that moment fully, for the first time, exactly what I'd been given by getting on that plane. I want to be honest about what I'd tell somebody considering something like this, because I don't want to leave you with only the beautiful parts. Talk to your own doctor first, honestly, and let them help you plan rather than fighting them or hiding your intentions from them. Do not travel internationally with a serious illness without proper international medical insurance, full stop, regardless of what anyone tells you about how cheap local health care is. Establish a relationship with a specific hospital and a specific physician quickly, rather than treating health care as something you'll figure out if and when you need it. Bring someone with you if you possibly can, whether that's family or a hired caregiver. Because the honest truth is that serious illness abroad, however wonderful the place, is genuinely harder to manage entirely alone. And talk to an immigration professional about which visa category actually fits your specific medical and financial situation, because mine will not be identical to yours, and guessing your way through Thai immigration law is not somewhere you want to improvise. This isn't for everyone, and I want to say that plainly. Some people, quite reasonably, would rather spend their final chapter surrounded by the exact same walls and the exact same faces they've known their whole lives, close to family, close to the familiar. That is not a lesser choice. It is simply a different one. I only knew, once I actually sat with the question honestly, that it wasn't my choice, and I am profoundly grateful I let myself say so out loud instead of assuming it was. I think about Doris often, especially in the evenings when the light does that particular gold thing it does here just before it disappears behind the mountains. I used to think that feeling steady, feeling something close to peaceful, was somehow a kind of forgetting her. I don't believe that anymore. I think she'd have loved Knock's coffee stall. I think she'd have laughed at Roger's dry British humor within about a minute of meeting him. I think if she could see me in that harness being lowered into water the color of glass, orange fish swimming between my legs, she'd have laughed exactly as hard as I did, and told me it was about time. Carol came to visit 6 weeks ago. She'd been frightened the whole time before her flight, she told me later, bracing herself for something sad, something that would confirm every fear she'd carried since that conversation in my kitchen. Instead, she found her father sitting at a coffee stall at 7 in the morning, laughing with a Thai widow he now considers something close to family, planning, with genuine enthusiasm, an afternoon temple visit for later that same day. She sat across from me at that little stall, and after a long, quiet moment, she said, "Dad, I came here braced to say goodbye, and instead I think I just watched you be more alive than I've seen you in 5 years. I don't fully understand it, but I'm not scared anymore. I'm just glad." That's the truest thing anybody has said to me since the day in the driveway. I don't know exactly how much time I've got left. Nobody in my situation ever does. And the original number the doctor gave me was always an estimate, never a guarantee, which cuts both ways, the way these things always do. What I know is that 19 months ago I was a man sitting in a driveway staring at his own front door, and today I am a man who has an actual friend named Roger, an actual second family in a coffee stall 3 streets from where I sleep with, and a memory of orange fish swimming through his legs in water so clear it looked like nothing was there at all. If you are sitting somewhere right now with a number of your own, whatever that number is, whether it came from a doctor or just from the quiet exhaustion of a life that's gotten smaller than you meant it to be, I want to leave you with the only real piece of wisdom I've earned in 84 years and 19 especially strange, especially precious months. The waiting is not required. Nobody handed you a rule that says the hard chapters have to be spent staring at a closed door. You are allowed, whatever your circumstances, to go looking for one more open one. So let me ask you something, because I genuinely like to know. If you found out today that your time, whatever amount of it you've actually got, was shorter than you'd planned, what is the one door you'd finally let yourself open? I'd like to think somebody watching this might actually go and open it. Take care of yourselves out there. Time is shorter than any of us like to admit, sick or well, and it's never too late to go looking for the door that's still open. I'll see you in the next one, from right here, under a mountain sky in Chiang Mai.